hours into the largest auto worker strike in more than 10 years. Nearly 50,000 of them walked off the job at midnight. The move means dozens of GM plants and warehouses are shut down today. Both sides will get back to the negotiating table later this hour. But the longer this strike drags on, the bigger the impact for General Motors, the employees, and potentially the United States economy. I said it. We got a lot to cover. Ann Thompson is in Detroit, headquarters for GM. And give us the details from your end. How long do you think this is going to take to get resolved? 50,000 people? That's a lot.
No, well, yeah, it is a lot of people, and it's going to be a very expensive strike for GM. The last time the UAW struck, which was in 2007, that strike cost GM $300 million a day. Now, fast forward to 2019, the issues on the table are moving temporary workers into full-time positions. That's big. Affordable health care. And of course, it's something you've heard a lot about in the last year, these unallocated plants. These are plants that are going to be idled. And one of them is the plant I'm standing in front of, the Detroit Hamtramck plant. And Wiley Turnage, Wiley, if you would come in here, he is the president of the local here. Wiley, what is it that your employees are looking for from this strike?
We're looking for some product.
You want product?
We want product.
Because you're about to lose the 2 vehicles that you make here.
Right now, it's unallocated for January of 2020.
And how many people will be out of jobs if that happens?
Right around 700.
700, and that will impact the Detroit area. Are you willing to build electric cars? Do you care what the product is?
We just want to keep jobs here. Yep, we want to keep jobs. We have a lot of young families here. We have temporary workers, you know. We have our janitors, we have our LOC, so, you know, we all need jobs, and we need job security.
Wiley, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So that's one of the issues. 700 jobs at this plant alone are on the line. GM says it's made an offer. It's willing to invest $7 billion throughout the company, and it wants to give either lump sum or yearly wage increases to the UAW workers. But right now, the two sides are very far apart. Stephanie?
All right, Ann, thank you so much. That is what's happening. Let's find out what it all means. I've got the two perfect guests to break this down. Tom Krischer covers the auto industry for the Associated Press, and Nathan Bomey, a business reporter for USA Today, who spent years covering this topic for the Detroit Free Press. Nathan, to you first. Why should the average American out there care about this story? What's the potential impact on car prices? And is there a potential impact on the U.S. economy?
Well, it's probably no immediate impact, but if this strike, goes on for days or several weeks, you could eventually see some impact on the availability of cars. Certainly any cars that need to be special order, custom ordered up front would not be available because the workers aren't out there to make them.
Tom, how did it get to this point?
Well, that depends on who you talk to. The company started off its negotiations wanting to get its costs, labor costs, equal to or close to the foreign automakers that have plants mainly in the South. GM workers make about $30 an hour. Their costs with benefits are about $63. The costs for the foreign automakers are about $50. So GM wanted to close that gap a little bit. The company's afraid that its costs will go up, and if it can get undercut on prices, and people might start buying more of the foreign automakers' cars. The union, though, wants a greater share of General Motors' profits. GM made $8 billion last year. All the automakers are pretty successful right now, and they want a bigger share, and they want pay raises, which they haven't gotten very many. They've gotten lump sum profit sharing checks, but they want pay raises that occur all the time in case of an economic downturn. So you've got two very divergent views on this.
Nathan, for people who do not work in a union, who aren't familiar with them, give us a sense of how the UAW has helped or hurt the communities it's part of, specifically places like Detroit.
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. If you look at the history of the UAW, they helped build the middle class in America, helped, give people a good wage that they could, hit the factory line and support their kids. On the other hand, I think it's also well documented that the UAW's compensation ended up contributing to the General Motors and Chrysler bankruptcy. So, it's sort of a mixed bag. And I think if you look at, though, the concessions that they made that also helped the companies get out of bankruptcy, that was significant. So now that the bankruptcy policies are farther and farther into the past, becoming more of a distant memory, the auto workers want to get some of that compensation back that they gave up.
Tom, let's talk political strategy for a moment. The vast majority of these GM facilities are squarely in Trump country. 8 of the 9 states voted for President Trump back in 2016. We know that the president has been very vocal about keeping jobs in the United States. Is the UAW capitalizing on that, hoping to put more pressure on GM?
I think it's probably helping the union that GM has a lot of pressure on them. But this would have happened regardless of any political campaign. The union wants to get, like Nathan said, some of the concessions back that it gave up going into the bankruptcy and heading out of the bankruptcy. So it's I don't think the politics is playing that much into it, but we're told by sources that the Lordstown, Ohio plant, which was the biggest kind of political football, Lordstown, Ohio GM offered to put an electric car battery manufacturing plant in there. And if that happens, that would give President Trump some bragging rights and something to talk about. But that's all kind of in the future. We'll see what happens.
Nathan, New York Times reporting that even though the share of unionized workers is shrinking, labor has become a lot more assertive in recent years. Do you agree with that? And if so, what are the consequences?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at the political movement, particularly on the left, there's been a movement to support unions. And, the UAW feels pretty emboldened here. Part of the problem is the UAW is also facing a major corruption investigation right now that involves potentially even the current president of the UAW and the past president of the UAW. So they're walking on eggshells here. They need to be careful. They need to be out there sort of pushing, their party line, but also not getting too aggressive, because there are everyday ordinary workers who are getting frustrated at some of the headlines they're seeing about this corruption investigation.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both so much. You made us better and smarter this morning. I want to continue to talk Lordstown. Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan represents Ohio's 13th congressional district, including that very plant in Lordstown, which shut down back in March. He, of course, is also a candidate for president of the United States. Congressman, let's start right there. Do you think it's likely, I know you've advocated for it, for GM to take that Lordstown location and start to make electric car batteries?
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think, and you heard it from the union representative earlier in the segment, they just want to build something. And the problem is, we don't have national policies that are encouraging us, industrial policies encouraging us to build things again. There's no comprehensive plan between the government and the private sector, those public-private partnerships that are essential for us to move forward in some of these new sectors of the economy. And the tax cut, obviously, that cut corporate tax rates, there was no kind of incentive built into that tax cut to move into the next generation of vehicles or move into the next generation of communities that want to get rebuilt. And so it was just a quick tax cut. So here we are. I think this issue frames everything up, Stephanie. It's like we gave the tax cut $2.3 trillion, primarily to the top 1%, primarily to the shareholders. And what's it done for the workers? It's actually got them in a position now where they have to strike to try to bring some equity to the situation.
Okay, but then what should the president's role be in a labor dispute like this? He's already tweeted that he wants the two sides to come together. You're not only a congressman in the district, you yourself want to be president. What's the president's role?
Well, I think in this scenario, when you look at the fact that the CEO of GM makes $281 for every $1 that the average GM employee makes, and that they're literally striking because they want to move people from temporary workers into permanent workers who are actually maybe able to make $30 or $40 an hour, you should come down on the side of the workers. I mean, President Kennedy did this during the big steel crisis in the early 1960s. He reprimanded the CEOs of the steel companies for some of their actions. So the president is appropriately can take positions in these issues. But again, where's the public-private partnerships? Where's the long-term strategy that Germany has, that China has, for how you build out sectors of the economy using the catalytic nature of the government with the magic of the private sector and organizing that around specific industries like electric vehicles, like batteries, like solar, like wind, like artificial intelligence and machine learning, like additive manufacturing. There's no policy in the United States to move us down that road.
All right, well, then let's talk actual numbers, because I know you support the UAW. Some of the things they're fighting for make absolute sense: fair wages, profit sharing, and health care. But again, I want to look at the numbers, because according to the Center for Automotive Research, GM spends an average of $63 an hour for its factory workers. Eligible workers average more than $45,000 in profit sharing, and the average GM auto worker pays just 3% of total health care costs. Compare that to 28% for the average U.S. worker. So make the case to the average American out there who is not an auto worker. Why should they support the union in this dispute? To many, that sounds like a lot of money.
Well, it's a middle-class job. I mean, isn't that what we want for everyone in the United States? Instead of complain that they make too much money, I think the strategy needs to be, how do we lift everybody up into that same category? I mean, we see it happening here when the Lordstown plant that was mentioned earlier, just outside of Youngstown, was unallocated, which means they don't have a product. The ripple effect through the community. So if you build houses, if you sell groceries, if you have a bar or a restaurant, you're affected by that person or that thousands of people leaving your community or having a diminished wage. That money ripples throughout the community. The United Way, the local school district that benefits from it, so the teachers eventually get a raise. When they have good health care, like a lot of the UAW workers have, they go to a hospital that actually gets reimbursed for the care they provide for people, and then that charge that goes to the union or the company helps subsidize a lot of the other care that people can't afford. So we got to start lifting people up and recognizing that, look what's happened to the country in the last 40 years. CEO pay's gone up over 900%, worker pay about 12%. This is no way to run the greatest country in the world. So the UAW sets that standard, and we hope everybody else can fill in and then move up to them. And I will tell you, if UAW workers take a huge hit, if there's temporary workers at these GM facilities, that's going to ripple in a negative way throughout all of these communities across the industrial Midwest.
All right, well, what about UAW leadership? Last week, the Detroit News reported that the presidents of the UAW have been linked to a corruption investigation by the Justice Department. They have not been charged. It's really important to clarify that. But given that there's an investigation going on, how does that complicate these negotiations in your mind? Is it unreasonable to ask GM to negotiate with these leaders while the investigation is happening?
Well, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. There are a lot of investigations that happen. I don't think it should have any effect at all on the negotiations here. Obviously, it will from a public relations standpoint, so it's unfortunate because I think the union and the workers have really good arguments as to why to be out. And so it's unfortunate. But again, I mean, it's only an investigation. Nobody knows. Nobody's been prosecuted yet or even charged, especially at the higher levels. So I think it's unfortunate. We need to move forward. But again, Stephanie, I've been calling throughout my entire presidential campaign new and better. You know, it's not left and right. It's new and better. New and better unions, new and better private sector, new and better government, new and better research, new and better education, new and better for everything. And that includes the unions, too. I mean, it's 21st century. It's 2019. You know, they have a clear role, and I'm supporting them in the role. And so, you know, we've all got to be impeccable to the extent we can be moving forward as we move into, 2020 and what this brutal economy is going to look like moving forward.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.